My name is Rashid Karim and I'm 38 years old. If you had met me 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't be here listening to what I have to say. Back then, I was someone people avoided. Not because they admired me, but because they were afraid. I wasn't one to talk about feelings, much less tell stories. I would end any conversation coldly, and if necessary, violently. I was born in northern Nigeria, in a dry, hot region where dust clung to my skin, and the sound of the call to prayer marked the rhythm of each day. From the moment I began to understand the world around me, Islam wasn't just a religion to me. It was like the air I breathed, indispensable and absolute. My earliest memories are of my father's steady voice reciting verses from the Quran before sunrise, filling the house with that solemn sound. My ever-devoted mother would push me to the madrasa in the still dark, just as the first rays of light were beginning to appear. We grew up in poverty. We didn't go hungry, but we lived with a hardness of heart that seemed to be part of us. From an early age, I learned that the outside world wouldn't love or help you, unless you made people fear what you were capable of. My father was a proud and stern man, the pillar of discipline in our home. He taught me two rules that he said were unbreakable: never question Allah and never show weakness. If I cried even for a small reason, his gaze would turn cold and cutting, as if I had committed an unforgivable error. Harden your heart, Rashid. A man's tears belong only to Allah and should be shed in secret, he would say. Even before I learned to write my name, I was reciting surahs by heart. The mosque imam looked at me with hope and told me I was destined for great things. I believed great meant being pure, holy, an example of faith. But over time, I realized it could also mean something much darker and more frightening. When I turned 16, war began to invade our daily lives like a silent and deadly shadow. The name Boko Haram, it was no longer just a whisper of fear, but a real, terrifying presence. They arrived on motorcycles, armed, shouting Allahu Akbar, leaving smoke and destruction in their wake. My friends trembled with fear, but I saw something different. I saw power. They commanded respect and obedience with just a menacing glare and the raised barrel of a rifle. The first recruiter I crossed paths with placed a firm hand on my shoulder and asked, "Young man, do you want to be a lion or a sheep?" At that moment, at just 16 years old, my choice seemed obvious. I knew exactly what my response would be. My father tried to resist, but it wasn't fear of what might happen to me. It was fear of losing control, of seeing the son he knew disappear forever. When the mosque imam spoke to him about the importance of defending Islam and purifying our land, that resistance shattered like glass. That Friday, right after the Jumu'ah prayer, they took me to a camp hidden in the middle of the bush, far from everything I knew. It was on that day that the boy Rashidid and the warrior was born Idris. There, the first lesson was to obey without question. They taught me to transform faith into a weapon and obedience into blind strength. They placed a rifle in my hands before even teaching me how to aim, telling me that faith, if not directed, could turn against me. Nights were spent around the campfire, listening to our commanders use the Quran and Hadith to justify every act of violence they ordered us to commit. We watched battle videos and learned to celebrate the deaths of our enemies as if it were a sacred victory. I swallowed every lie as if it were the purest truth. Over time, I became exactly what they wanted. At 25, I was no longer just another soldier. I was a commander. If you saw me back then, you would see a man who inspired fear and respect at the same time. Broad shoulders, a firm voice that silenced crowds, and a rifle always slung across his back, ready for anything. My men obeyed me without hesitation, and the name Idris made the villages tremble. Mothers hid their children as I passed, and the men averted their eyes. But behind that mask of power, there was a vast emptiness, a wound in my chest that nothing could fill. Not the money, not the respect, not the fear I provoked. It was a silent pain, a hole I hid at all costs, because in that world, admitting something was wrong was like signing one's own sentence. At night, when the camp finally fell silent, I would lie on my makeshift mat and gaze up at the starry sky. The desert sky of northern Nigeria is something you never forget. So vast and clear it seems within reach, like an infinite blanket of brilliant lights. In these hours of solitude, a doubt gnawed at me. If Allah is so great and merciful, as we've always been taught, why did my soul feel suffocating, trapped in an invisible cage? Why did the sacred verses I recited with fervor seem more like closed walls than open doors to freedom? It was an anguish I never shared with anyone. Not with my brothers in arms, not with my wife, amen, not even with myself. I buried these thoughts in an avalanche of blood and orders, keeping my heart hardened. I met Amina when I was 28. She wasn't like the other women in the camp. She had a deep calm and a watchful gaze, as if she saw beyond the obvious. Her hijab was always impeccable, and her voice, sweet, carried a firmness that soothed me. The marriage came quickly, as expected for someone in my position. She became my refuge amidst the chaos and fire of war. In the rare moments when the violence gave way, I would come home exhausted and sit beside her, listening to the old songs she sang while cooking. She never asked what I was doing outside. She knew it was better this way. Around her, I could almost believe she was just a husband and not the man so many feared. But looking back, today I see the cracks that began to appear, not only in me, but in the entire world I had built with effort and blood. My men began to grow restless, impatient. The attacks became increasingly brutal, and the orders I gave no longer held any honor. We fought for greed, for power, for revenge, all disguised with sacred verses and religious justifications. It was then that I noticed something that chilled me to the core. Stares. Stares from my own men toward Amina. Stares filled with intent, ones that frightened me. At first I tried to ignore them. At first I tried to convince myself it was all just paranoia, a result of the constant stress I was living under. But deep down, I knew a storm was brewing, and sooner or later it would destroy everything I knew. Before I continue, I need to say something important, not just for myself, but for you, listening now. Perhaps you are watching this in a safe place, far from the dust, fear, and violence that marked my youth. Or perhaps you're experiencing something similar, trapped by a religion, a system, or even the guilt and suffering that burden your soul. I'm not here to entertain. I'm sharing my story because I believe it can be a beacon for those who think there's no way out, for those who believe all hope is lost. If you've made it this far, I urge you, from the bottom of my heart, subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear that. No matter how far you've come, God's grace can reach you and completely transform your life. At that time, I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know what true grace was, nor did I understand the true meaning of love. All I knew was the man I had become, Idris Karim, commander of a group feared by all. But that man, who seemed invincible, was about to die. And it wouldn't be by a bullet or a knife. His downfall would come from something no enemy could take from me. It all started one night when I returned home and felt the air heavy, quieter than usual. Amina's gaze held a pain I'd never seen before. It was at that moment that the world I'd built began to crumble. I had already done things that stain my dreams to this day. Blood that not 1,000 washes could wash away. To the world, I was a powerful and feared commander. But inside, I was just a broken weapon. A man who had long ago forgotten what it meant to be human. In those years, my life revolved around attacks. Violence controlled every second, every choice, every breath. We swept through villages like raging storms, loud, fast, and relentless. The roar of motorcycles cut through the hot air, while rifles fired volleys in the middle of the night or under the blazing sun. Men shouted, "Allahu Akbar," in voices thick with fanaticism and hatred. Women and children fled in desperation, like frightened birds, trying to hide amid the chaos. We convinced ourselves that this was jihad, that we were defending Islam and purifying the land of infidels. But deep down, what we really wanted was absolute control, the power that comes from intimidation and domination. The Quran was used as a shield and justification, but the real goal was to impose our will at any cost. When I took a man's life for the first time, I felt nothing, no guilt, no relief, no sense of victory, just a deep emptiness, a dark hole in my chest that seemed to swallow everything. My commanders praised me, saying I had the heart of a true mujahid, a warrior dedicated to the holy cause. Over time, I learned to recognize the look of someone who knows they're about to die. There's a moment when their eyes are lost, as if trying to capture the last image of the world before their departure. Some fight with all their might, others beg for mercy, and some just stare, accepting their fate. Those gazes haunted me even in my dreams, like ghosts that refused to go away. My men feared me, and in our world, fear and respect were the same thing. I had built a ruthless reputation. Idris Karim was a name that left no room for doubt. I never hesitated, never showed weakness, and never spared anyone who was branded an enemy. They trusted me to lead, and I trusted they would obey. They obeyed me without question. But in the quiet moments, when the adrenaline of battle wore off, I found myself trapped in the sounds we left behind. The desperate cries of mothers, the heavy silence that followed a gunshot, the metallic, acidic smell of blood mixed with the dried dust on the ground. These sounds and images were ghosts I carried with me, even without admitting it to anyone. We always found a verse in the Quran or a quote from the Hadith to justify each act of violence. We transformed terror and death into something sacred. I vividly remember one night, sitting near the fire, when an old man recited in a firm voice a passage from Surah 8, verse 12, "I will cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, therefore cut off their heads." He spoke as if it were poetry, smiling, the flames reflecting in his eyes full of fervor and cruelty. That night, I went to sleep with a heavy thought, how easy it is to turn God into a weapon, a pretext for evil. The months passed, and my hands grew increasingly bloodied. My heart grew harder. I stopped counting the attacks. The villages began to blur together in my memory, each one seeming like a grim repetition of the last. I would mount the motorcycle, give orders, and watch my men execute them with the cold precision of a trained machine. In that world, there was no room for doubt or hesitation. Any sign of weakness could be fatal. Hesitating meant signing the death warrant, your own or someone you loved. Even so, amid so much darkness, some moments pierced my armor. During one raid, we captured a group of Christians who refused to renounce their faith. Among them was an elderly man with white hair and trembling hands. He looked me in the eye and said something that echoed within me like thunder. "You think you're strong, but you're the most trapped man here." I tried to silence him with a blow, but those words stuck in me like a thorn. The leaders brooked no resistance. When there was opposition, the order was clear. Make an example in the public square to intimidate and crush any attempted rebellion. Many of my men took pride in being chosen for these cruel executions. And me? I continued to lead, pushing everyone and myself further and further into the abyss. But something new began to blossom within me. It wasn't compassion, it was a profound weariness, a soul weariness that not even sleep could alleviate. Still, I continued. The invasions were already automatic, mechanical, until the day everything changed. We received information that a village was harboring a government informant. The elders ordered me to personally lead the attack. At dawn, we advanced. I gave the orders, and my men carried them out with ruthless coldness. Houses were set ablaze, the flames devouring roofs and walls, while the smell of burning wood mingled with the dust of the dry earth. Livestock were slaughtered mercilessly, robbing families of what little sustenance they had. People were gathered in the center of the village, some weeping, others simply paralyzed, accepting their fate. The sound of gunfire echoed like war drums, making my heart beat faster. When it was all over, I stood in the middle of that destroyed landscape, surrounded by smoke and a suffocating silence. My men began to celebrate, firing into the air and laughing loudly, a laughter too shrill for that devastated place. For them, it was a victory party. For me, it was just another weight crushing my chest. I felt neither pride nor relief, just an oppressive emptiness, as if something were about to break me from within. Inside me, something was breaking. As we prepared to leave the destroyed village, one of my lieutenants came up to me, smiling proudly. "Commander, this will be remembered for months. The elders will be proud," he said. I simply nodded, but my mind was far away, prey to thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't get the white-haired old man we'd captured days before out of my mind, the one who'd called me prisoner. Taken. That word echoed inside me like a persistent whisper, an uncomfortable truth that I didn't want to hear, but that insisted on staying. That night, back at camp, I lay on my mat, listening to the calm breathing of my men. My rifle lay beside me, my boots still dirty from the ash of the village. And for the first time in many years, I asked myself, after all, what is all this for? I had power. I had fear in the eyes of anyone who saw me. I had the absolute loyalty of my soldiers. But peace, I never had that. And deep down, I knew I never would. What I didn't imagine was that that day marked the beginning of my downfall. The victory in that village was the last one that truly felt like a victory. After that, every mission, every order, every drop of blood, everything only added to a weight I could no longer bear. On the way home, I had no idea of the battle that awaited me, a battle that no weapon could win. I still remember the smell when I opened the door. The scent of fireplace smoke still lingering on my clothes mingled with the gentle aroma of the food Amina had prepared. I called her name, hoping to hear that calm answer, the voice that always brought me some peace. But in that moment, there was only silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to portend the worst. The door creaked as it was pushed open, and that silence seemed to fill every corner of the house. Amina always greeted me with a loving gaze, even when she didn't approve of what I did to survive. She had learned to live with the blood on my clothes and the scars on my hands. At least, that's what I believed. I called her name again, louder. Nothing. A strange weight began to tighten on my chest. I entered the small living room and saw a cup lying on the floor, a dark tea stain spreading across the worn carpet. My heart raced. Near the bedroom door, I saw her handkerchief crumpled on the floor, something completely out of the ordinary. I took the fabric in my hands, feeling its softness. But at the same time, a sick feeling rose in my stomach, a knot tightening my chest. I slowly pushed the door open and found her sitting on the edge of the bed. Her posture was straight, but her shoulders trembled. When she looked up, I saw something I never thought I would. Swollen, red eyes, bruises at the corners of her mouth. Clear marks of pain and suffering. My breath caught, words faded, until with effort I managed to ask softly, "Amina, what happened?" My voice came out filled with a new pain, with a fear I didn't know. She tried to speak, but her voice was broken in fragile sobs, almost impossible to hear. They come when you're not there. Your men." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "My men?" I asked, even though I already knew the bitter answer that would come. My pulse raced, blood pounding in my ears. They said they had your permission. Her voice trailed off. They laughed when I said no. She didn't need to finish. The brutal images formed in my mind, clear and relentless. My own men, those I called brothers, who swore loyalty, who I was supposed to protect, had become something I barely recognized. I sat up slowly, the world spinning around me. Who? Tell me their names. I forced out the words, trying to maintain control. She just shook her head, a deep sadness in her eyes. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. Her words were a direct blow without mercy. You think you command them, that you are in control. But no, you have become one of them. It cut deeper than any blade. It hurt more than the worst physical wound. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that I was different, that there was still hope. But what proof did I have? My entire reputation was built on violence, fear, and blind obedience. I myself had unleashed those men upon the world to wreak havoc, and now ruin was knocking at my door. I stood up and began pacing. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, shame, and confusion. My first impulse was revenge, to hunt them down, punish them one by one, make them pay for what they had done. But behind this fury, a darker voice whispered, and I couldn't silence it. This is what you built. It is the fruit of your own hands. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat outside under the silent, starry desert sky. The cool air enveloped my weary body. Every distant sound made me shiver, not for fear of some enemy, but for fear of what I myself had become. I'd always prided myself on my authority, believing it would keep everything in order, but then the truth hit me hard. It was all just a fragile lie, a house of cards about to collapse. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, I went back inside. Amina lay with her back to me, her breathing ragged. I wanted to reach out, hold her, tell her everything would be okay, but I didn't know how. My presence, once a comfort, was now only a painful reminder of the danger I posed to her life. It was at that moment that, for the first time, I considered the possibility of abandoning everything. The command, the men, the war, that whole life. But soon, an even crueler thought came. Where would I go? Who would I be without all this? My identity, my existence were tied to that struggle, that jihad, that blood-stained brotherhood. Without them, I was nothing. It was then that I remembered the words of the white-haired old man. You are the most imprisoned man here. Before, I would have laughed, dismissed it as madness. But now, I understood. My men's betrayal wasn't just their own failure, it was my own undoing. The collapse of the world I had built. And it was in this open wound that something began to stir within me. It wasn't hope yet. It was more like a timid desire, a longing for something different, pure, something I'd never known. I didn't know it at the time, but the tiny seed would lead me down paths I never imagined, paths that would force me to face what I'd been running from my entire life. The truth. I thought I knew anger. I thought I knew pain, but nothing compared to the emptiness that settled in my chest. After that day, Amina no longer looked me in the eye. She passed through the house like a shadow, silent, distant, almost invisible. It was like carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. For years I had been her shield, her protector against any threat, but in that moment I was nothing more than a living reminder of what had broken her heart. I tried to confront the men I suspected were responsible. I called them out in front of the others, confronting them with a voice trembling between fury and despair. But they were undaunted. They laughed, as if I were a fool. "Commander," one of them said with a mocking smile, "don't we have a right to the spoils of war?" Those words froze me inside. I wanted to rip his life out right then and there, but I knew that to act justly within the rules of our world, I would need the verdict of the Sharia Council. I went to the elders, the same ones who for years had received my blind loyalty and obedience. I told them everything with a heavy heart, hoping that my pain would be acknowledged, that justice would be served, that at least there would be a condemnation of the betrayal I had suffered. But to my surprise and sadness, the response was cold. They cited hadiths and doctrines, twisting every word like a sharp blade to justify the unjustifiable. The wife is the husband's property, they said. One of the leaders, in a firm, icy voice, declared, if she is taken by another, what is at stake is his honor, not hers. Don't provoke bloodshed over a misunderstanding. To them, Amina's tears, the bruises on her face, and the pain-filled silence were nothing more than unimportant details. I left that room with trembling hands, a whirlwind of thoughts, and a crushed heart. For the first time, I felt like the words I had recited with such devotion were nothing more than bitter dust in my mouth. Every time I bowed to pray, the image of Amina in pain returned to my mind. I saw the cruel smile of the man who hurt her, and the cold eyes of the elders who did nothing to protect her. Days passed, weeks turned. My prayers seemed lost in the void, unanswered. My heavy heart, filled with doubt and anguish, was tormented by dark dreams. I dreamed I was bound in heavy chains, being dragged by invisible forces across an endless desert. The more I struggled to free myself, the more the chains cut into my skin, sinking me deeper into that darkness. I would wake up sweating, my heart racing, my hands clutching the sheets, as if I were desperately searching for some anchor to keep me grounded in reality. Trying to escape that torture, I began spending my nights on my phone, scrolling aimlessly, searching for distraction, any relief. Then during one of those searches, I stumbled upon a forum unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't a traditional religious website, but a space with real stories, stories of men and women who had abandoned Islam. Some were from Nigeria, others from faraway places in the Middle East. At first, I read it with anger, calling them all traitors. At first, I read those stories with anger, calling those people apostates and traitors. But the more I read, something deep inside began to stir. These people talked about finding peace, not by rejecting God, but by truly knowing Him through Isa al-Masih, Jesus, the Messiah. For a long time, I thought it was dangerous. Just reading such things could cost me my life. If anyone found out, I could be punished, maybe even killed. Still, I couldn't stop. The words poured into my soul like fresh water falling on dry, cracked earth. One of those nights, I came across a verse someone had shared. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The word rest, it hit me like a blow. I hadn't felt rest in years. My body might be strong, my name might be feared, but my soul was exhausted, broken, lost. I told no one, not Amina, not the men I trusted most. This was my deepest secret, my silent rebellion. Not against the world, but against the lies I had based my entire life on. There, in a hidden corner of my heart, a seed began to sprout, a dangerous, unknown, silent seed, but alive. I didn't know what it would become, nor where it would take me. I knew only one thing. I could no longer close my eyes to what I was beginning to see. Allah's silence, which had previously seemed like mere absence, now became a constant weight, impossible to ignore. On a hot night, one of those where the air is thick and suffocating, Amina had already been asleep for hours, but I remained awake, lying on the mattress, staring at the ceiling, lost in the questions that hammered in my mind. Who am I really? What do I still believe in? Is there really a God who cares, who listens, who is present? These doubts swirled inside me like a whirlwind, refusing to let me rest. It was then, in the space between wakefulness and sleep, that something changed. The room around me began to fade, as if reality was slowly unraveling. The air became fresh, light, incredibly pure, unlike anything I had ever felt. Suddenly, I was standing on the bank of a calm, wide river. The water glowed with a light that came neither from the sun nor the moon, but from something much softer and yet more powerful. The room was silent, but every sound seemed amplified. The faint rustle of invisible leaves and the gentle sound of water lapping at the shore. It was then that I saw him, a man dressed in white, but it was no ordinary white. It seemed as if his clothes were made of light itself, so intense that no shadow could linger around him. It wasn't just the brightness that captivated me. It was his eyes, deep, warm, steady, as if they saw beyond my flesh, piercing through all the barriers I'd erected in my heart. He pronounced my name, not as someone reading something unknown, but as someone who had always known my soul since before the world existed. "Come to me," he said. "I know your pain. Come, and I will give you rest." When I heard those words, something inside me broke. Years of anger, guilt, shame, and sadness came flooding back like a dam breaking. I fell to my knees, feeling the weight of my body and the overflowing of my heart. I wanted to ask who he was, but my voice caught. He extended his hand. There was no pressure, no demand, just a silent, patient invitation. I woke up gasping, my body covered in sweat and tears streaming down my face. My chest felt lighter, as if the chains that had bound me in my nightmares had finally been broken. I sat in the dark, my hands shaking, trying to understand. That voice was the same one from the verse I had read on the forum. "Come to me, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Indeed, it couldn't be a coincidence. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and typed that verse about rest attributed to Jesus into the search engine. The first result took me to Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. It was exactly the same wording. I stood there motionless, reading and rereading, and then I began searching for everything I could find about Isa al-Masih. I spent hours reading stories, miracles, teachings. I read about how he healed the sick, forgave sinners, reached out to the rejected and marginalized, and how he loved even those who hated him. No imam, no religious leader had ever spoken of God in that way. For them, Allah had always been synonymous with power, judgment, and absolute obedience. But Jesus was different. He was pure love, love without conditions. Night after night, I returned to that online space, as if guided by an invisible light. His words pierced my soul in a way I couldn't explain. When I read about forgiving 70 times 7, I immediately thought of Amina's hurt eyes. When he said to love your enemy, I remembered the cold faces of the men I myself had ordered executed. And when I am the way, the truth, and the life, I knew in that instant that I had found something Boko Haram could never give me. Real hope, real freedom. I didn't tell anyone about the dream, at least not at that moment. But deep down, I knew the man in white hadn't been just a fleeting vision. He had called me by name. He had reached me at the deepest point of my pain, and I knew, with a certainty impossible to ignore, that one day I would have to answer that call. But in our world, whispers travel faster than bullets. I soon realized something was different in the air, lingering glances, conversations that stopped when I approached. My name seemed to have become a forbidden secret. Gradually, I stopped leading attacks. To them, I told them I was tired, that an old injury was bothering me, but the truth was different. Something inside me simply couldn't lift a weapon with the same conviction, nor call for violence with the same fervor. Everything changed the day a young Christian man captured in a nearby village was brought to me. He was tied up, his wrists scarred, his shirt torn, his face swollen from the beatings. One of the younger fighters, full of arrogance, placed a rifle in my hands and said in a defiant tone, "Commander, give the order. Show that you're still with us." I looked into the prisoner's eyes and saw no fear. I saw calm, a steady, almost unsettling peace. It was as if, in that gaze, I saw the same man in white from my dream, as if he were there, right in front of us. My hand froze on the trigger. The young fighter grew impatient, his gaze sharp. "Commander," he said, almost accusingly. I took a deep breath and replied, my voice trembling, "Let him go." The words sounded strange, almost bitter, coming out of my mouth. The men looked at each other, confused and suspicious. "This man is infidels," shouted one of them. Another shouted, "He is an enemy of Allah." I kept my gaze steady and repeated in a low but impossible to argue tone, "Let him go." That's when everything began to crumble. The walls that had held me together began to close in around me. A few days later, I was summoned by the elders. They waited for me with hard faces, without a shred of compassion. "Idris," one of them began, "your leadership is being questioned. There are whispers of weakness, of doubts in your heart." I looked into his eyes and replied, "It's not weakness, it's justice. Not every man we capture deserves to die," I said, glaring at the elders. One of them leaned forward, eyes sharp as blades. "The Quran is clear," he said menacingly. "Are you saying Allah is wrong?" I didn't answer, and in that silence I said more than any words could express. That night, when I returned to my quarters, I found Amina looking at me with concern. "You need to be careful," she whispered. "They say you've been saying things that aren't Islamic. Your own brothers will turn against you." She was right. This was already happening. My cousins, my fellow soldiers, avoided my gaze, barely hiding their distrust. Then came my father's message, delivered by a messenger: "Prove your loyalty to Islam before it's too late." I knew what that meant. It was a call to shed blood, to wash away any suspicion of blasphemy with violence. But I couldn't take it anymore. Something inside me had changed. Jesus' words, the memory of the voice I heard by the river in that dream, the inexplicable peace I felt whenever I read that verse in the forum. It was all too powerful to ignore. I began to prepare myself for what I knew was coming. If they came after me, I wouldn't fight them, but I also wouldn't give up what I had begun to believe in. At night, in secret, I prayed, no longer to Allah, but to the one I had seen in white by the river. I didn't know any pretty prayers. I just said, "If you are real, hold me. I'm scared." The fear was real, yes, but there was also something new inside me, a determination I had never felt before. I was already hiding, avoiding eyes, moving like a shadow. The news was spreading fast. "He's confused, he's dangerous, he's a traitor to the cause." In our world, those words were a death sentence. I began to move between abandoned cabins and patches of dense forest, often sleeping with one ear open and my hand firmly gripping a small knife, my last defense. One such night, when the moon was low, thin and sharp as a blade, I found refuge in an old mud house. The floor was cracked, covered in years of accumulated dust, but for me it was shelter. There, in the silence of the night, I could simply exist for a few minutes, away from the eyes, away from the guns, with my heart beating fast, full of fear and hope at the same time. I managed to hide my simple old cell phone, with its scratched screen and nearly muted sound, to anyone else, a useless object. But for me, it was the only bridge to the outside world, the only way to stay in touch with that new hope I barely understood. A few weeks earlier, I had downloaded a Bible app, and in the rare gaps of silence and darkness, I read those pages like someone guarding a forbidden treasure. That night, I opened the Gospel of John, my hands trembling slightly. My eyes fell on a verse that seemed to have been written just for me. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." It felt like those words were waiting for me, whispering straight to my exhausted heart. And I wasn't just tired, I was crushed, carrying a lifetime of weight, full of guilt, loss, and blood. I kept reading. The Gospel of John spoke of a God who so loved the world that he gave his only Son. It seemed impossible. In Islam, Allah loves those who obey and punishes those who disobey, a love conditioned by fear and submission. But those words spoke of something entirely different, a love that reached me even before I did anything to deserve it. At that moment, all the faces that had passed through my life began to parade through my mind. The men I had ordered executed, the women who had screamed for mercy, the children who had fled in terror. And then, a question entered my heart. If Jesus is really who he says he is, could he forgive me? I didn't kneel, not because I didn't want to, but because I simply didn't know how. I just sat, head in my hands, and whispered, "Jesus, if you are my Lord, I am yours. Take my life. It is all I have left." As soon as those words left my mouth, something inside me snapped. Years of hardness, hatred, and control shattered in an instant. I started crying. An intense, uncontrolled cry, the kind that shakes your entire body, as if I were finally letting go of a weight I had been carrying for a long time. And then, peace came. It wasn't the relief of escaping danger or winning a fight. It was something deeper, more genuine, as if someone had entered the dusty room of my soul, lifted the burden from my shoulders, and breathed new life into me. In that moment, I was no longer the commander. I was no longer the hunter, the executioner, the servant of death. I was someone rescued, someone with a chance to start over. I didn't understand everything, nor did I know what would come next. But one thing I was certain of, I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. That night, for the first time in many years, I slept without fear, and the peace I felt was no passing illusion. It was real. But peace doesn't erase danger. It doesn't change overnight the brutal world I came from. When I finally told my family, it was like a bomb had gone off in the house. My father's voice trembled like thunder. "You are no longer my son. You spit on the faith of our fathers." My mother spent the whole night crying, clutching her handkerchief, begging me to tell her that I had made a mistake. "Idris, it's Shaitan who's deceiving you. Come back before it's too late." I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her I was still her son. But the truth was too harsh. The moment I chose Jesus, I also chose exile. My brothers stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes filled with judgment. They didn't need to say anything. The sentence was written all over their faces. The next day, the news spread like wildfire. Old friends began hunting me. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to debate. They wanted to wipe me off the face of the earth. That night, I left. I took almost nothing, just my phone, a small bag of food, and the clothes on my back, already worn and sweaty. I followed hidden paths, moving under the cover of darkness. Every noise made me shiver, the snap of a twig, the rustle of dry leaves, even the distant bark of a dog seemed a threat. When dawn arrived, I was already in the middle of the dense forest, surrounded by a nature that seemed at the same time friend and enemy. The constant buzzing of mosquitoes filled my ears. The air was heavy and humid, almost suffocating. My legs burned with every step, my throat burned with thirst, but I couldn't stop. I knew they could be behind me, following every trail I'd left in the dirt. Fear and adrenaline drove me forward, even as my body was overcome with exhaustion. Hours later, nearly stumbling with exhaustion, I spotted a small cluster of houses hidden among dense trees, like a well-kept secret deep in the forest. It was a shelter run by Christians, brave men and women who risked their own lives to protect people like me, fleeing a war that seemed endless. A thin man with a serene, kind look opened the gate without saying anything, simply motioning me in. Inside, the air smelled simple and welcoming, a mixture of wood smoke and freshly baked bread. They offered me water, food, and a corner to rest. I couldn't say thank you, but I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: human warmth. A touch of humanity in the midst of so much chaos. That night, lying on a thin, hard mattress, I heard distant gunshots piercing the silence. The sound was faint, but unmistakable to me, a cruel reminder that my old life still haunted me. Men who had once been under my command were now hunting my very life. In the darkness, I said a simple prayer with a heavy heart. Lord, hide me, make me invisible to them and to the evil that pursues me. For the first time, my words didn't ask for the strength to kill or survive another battle. I didn't ask for power or revenge. I asked to live and follow this new path, no matter how hard, no matter the cost. Months passed in that shelter, which gradually became my little world. Nights were marked by Bible studies, by the flickering light of lamps, whispered prayers, and the discreet arrival of other fugitives who came and went under the cover of shadows. But there was one pain that never left me, Amina. I didn't know if she was safe, if she still thought about me, or if she had already forgotten me. One morning, after a whole night of prayer and restlessness, I realized I could no longer bear the distance. I had to see her, even if it cost me dearly. I put on a simple tunic and a woolen cap, kept my head down so as not to be recognized, and set out before dawn. I walked like a shadow along the dirt roads, always keeping close to the edge of the forest, where the tall grasses offered some protection. My heart raced with every step as I approached the village. Even in the morning silence, the place pulsed with vivid memories. Children chasing goats in the dust, the call to prayer echoing distantly from the mosque, my mother cooking to the rhythm of the wind and the seasons. I found Amina in her father's backyard, hanging wet clothes on the clothesline. When she saw me, she froze for a moment. A heavy silence fell between us. Her eyes filled with tears, and all she could whisper was, "Idris." I took a step forward, wanting to speak, to explain. But before any words could come out, a harsh voice cut through the air behind me. "Commander Idris, or rather apostate." I turned slowly and saw the village imam. His white robe fluttered in the dry wind, and his grey beard reinforced the authority in his gaze. A small crowd was beginning to gather around him, their faces grim and their eyes filled with judgment. "You have shamed your family," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. "You have rejected Allah, and you still have the audacity to come back here?" The murmur of the people grew louder, some in anger, some merely curious, but I felt the weight of each gaze piercing my soul. "I have found the truth," I replied firmly, though my heart was beating so fast it felt like it was about to leap out of my chest. "The truth is, Inisa al-Masih, Jesus Christ." The imam's face darkened like the sky before a storm. "You desecrate this place with the name of a false prophet," he declared. "You dishonor Sharia. Repent now, or face the consequences." I shook my head slowly. I knew I couldn't deny what was already engraved deep within me. He gave his life for me, a sacrifice so great that it cannot be exchanged for fear or retreat. The moment I said that, I knew there was no turning back. Suddenly, the crowd erupted in cheers. Angry voices mingled with the sound of hurried footsteps. Footsteps approached quickly, fists clenched, eyes filled with fury. I heard Amina's anguished cry, trying to reach me, but my eyes were fixed on the crowd charging toward me. It was as if my body had frozen, unable to react. It was then that suddenly a young man I had never seen before appeared at my side. He grabbed my arm firmly, but not aggressively, and said in an urgent whisper, "Come with me." I didn't hesitate. We ran through narrow, dirty alleys, the sound of our pursuers echoing behind us, heavy as a threat. We found a hidden passage between two crumbling walls. We crouched there, panting, our hearts pounding as if they were about to leap out of our chests. We sat in complete silence until the footsteps faded away. Only then did the young man turn to me and smile. It wasn't a big smile, but there was a warmth in it that surprised me. "You are not alone in this fight," he said with conviction. "We are much more than you can imagine." We walked together to a hidden refuge in the shadow of the forest. And as we walked, I realized something essential. My true battle had never been against men, nor against the imam, nor against those who accused me. The real fight was against that ancient darkness that for so many years had completely dominated me. Now I belonged to the light that found me and transformed me. Today I live by a new name. The world may still call me by other names, but before God I am simply His child, a redeemed child. Every morning the rooster's crow awakens the small Christian village that welcomed me. The air carries the comforting scent of smoke from campfires, mingled with the laughter of children running through the green fields. Here I am no longer hunted nor feared, though I know the danger never completely disappears. My days are now filled with honest work. I unload trucks full of sacks of grain, help rebuild homes burned by war, and bring supplies to families who have suffered the same violence I once inflicted. Sometimes, when I carry a sack of rice to a widow's hut or hold a crying orphan in my arms, a deep pain grips my chest. It's a cruel reminder of the man I was, the choices I made, the lives I took. But I've learned that Jesus doesn't erase our past like someone wiping a slate clean. He transforms, He redeems, and this truth gives me hope. Amina came back to live with me. It took months for her to trust again, to believe that the man she once feared was gone forever, and that before her now stood someone new. We still carry scars, hers, visible on her scarred skin, mine, hidden in our hearts and souls. But every night, we kneel together in prayer, and when she smiles, it's a smile born of peace, no longer of obligation or fear. One afternoon, I ended up telling my story in the village square to a group of young people. There were Christians and Muslims there, all attentive. I spoke of the emptiness that consumed my soul, of the days when, as a commander, I faced the silence of Allah, and of the man dressed in white who called my name that night that changed everything. I told of the indescribable peace I found when I surrendered myself to Jesus. True freedom has a name, I said, and that name is Jesus Christ. I saw tears in the eyes of a young man, almost a teenager, who was already being seduced by the same dark path I once walked. He whispered, "I want to meet this Jesus." And that's why I keep speaking out. That's why I keep going to places where I can still be recognized, because I know that if He transforms someone like me, He can transform anyone. The same grace that reached me in the depths of my sin continues to sustain me every day and can reach anyone. I'm no longer the Idris who spread fear and destruction. Today, I'm Idris, the redeemed, a man transformed by the love that saved me. And if He could save someone like me, He can save anyone, no matter how lost they seem. If you're listening to my story right now and feel trapped in a darkness with no way out, whether it's a lifeless religion, a guilt that eats away at your heart, or a past you can't escape, know that there is someone who sees you, someone who calls your name with love, someone who gave His life so that you could be truly free. Come to Him. The path may be difficult and costly, but the reward is eternal.